But today we're going to be in Luke chapter 15, looking at a very popular story, very famous story about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then the lost son. But I think that as I was studying this and preparing, as we're kind of leaning towards Easter, I noticed something in this story that I've never really noticed. I've always read it, but I saw an emphasis on it that I've never quite noticed before. And I want to share this with you today because maybe I think together we'll get to see something new in an old story here. And so Luke chapter 15, I didn't put the verse references because we're actually going to read the entire chapter today. So buckle up. It's not all on your paper notes, so you might need a Bible or look up here. So it starts off, verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." This man receives sinners and eats with them. A couple things here in this story. This is pretty normal as we've read Luke. We've seen this scenario play out a couple times where there's people who we would call as sinners, tax collectors. These people are drawing near to Jesus, and then there's the religious people who are upset with this. But in this particular story, there's a couple things that I noticed more so than maybe in others. Look at what the tax collectors and the sinners, they're drawing near not to receive the healing from Jesus, even though he did that. He was walking into cities and healing people and had a massive healing ministry. Even though he's walking into and raising people from the dead, look at what these people were gathering around him for. It says that they were drawing near to hear him, not just experience the benefits of his healing power, not just experience the benefit of his work, of the ministry that came out of his hands and out of his person, but they were actually there to hear the words that he spoke. They weren't just seeking healing, they also wanted to hear his teaching. And I think this is so important for us is when we come to church, man, I think it's important for us to not just to want to come and just feel God, even though I'm so grateful that there's times in his presence that I know that God is real, that I can sense his presence. But there ought to be an expectation and an urgency for us to hear his words. Like it's not just the worship, and I love the worship. Our worship team's incredible. It's not just the worship. It's not just those moments where you get the little tingly goosebumps, and that's cool when that happens, when you're like, oh man, I can sense the presence of God. Though that's cool too. It's not just that though. There should be an expectation and an urgency to hear him, to hear his word. And I hope as I preach or anyone else that preaches or anytime you open up to God's word, that you open it with an expectation to hear him. Because his words spoken change everything. But I want to look at this because if we look at this, we see that they were drawing near to hear Jesus, but that's not what the Pharisees were upset about. They weren't upset that they were there to hear his teaching. It says the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and he eats with them." You see, like doctrinally and their religiously, they couldn't be upset with someone teaching the Torah. They couldn't draw a line and be like, well, this rabbi, he's teaching wrong, because he wasn't teaching wrong. He was teaching, in fact, it says many Pharisees and scribes, even when he was a young boy, marveled at his understanding of the scripture. So they couldn't quite be upset that he was teaching from the same scripture along with them, and sometimes better than them often. So they weren't upset with that, but this is what they're upset with, the fact that he received sinners and that he ate with sinners. This man receives and he eats with them. Their fury, their anger, their accusations were centered around the fact that Jesus actually liked sinners. They weren't just a project for him to fix. They weren't just like, okay, all you broken people, all you sinners, follow me, like come get in line, I'm going to whack you into shape. He actually enjoyed their presence. Like when Jesus walked around with people, even people who weren't like him, he can find joy, he can find compassion, he can find love, he can find some common ground of humanity where he could look across on them and enjoy their time, enjoy their presence, enjoy their company, even though they were different than him. And this is the thing that frustrated, that enraged these Pharisees, was not that he was preaching at them, but it was that he enjoyed sitting with them. You know, I think this is really where the gospel becomes so real. Because there's a ton of great preachers out there, a lot of people who are much better preachers than me. But if there's one thing that I'm trying to do and do better at every day, it's not just preach here, but preach in my life. and spend time with people and actually know people and have friends and have people that I love and care for that don't believe the same as me. Like, we can't find ourselves in a place where we're polarizing ourselves and saying, because you're not like me, you can't be with me, I can't enjoy you, I can't. In fact, we see right here, Jesus, he just enjoyed and loved people. Look at the word. This man receives, this word receive, embraces. This is a word, like literally meaning to hug, to hold. Jesus, they're frustrated with Jesus, not because he was preaching at them, but because he actually loved them. It wasn't just, I love you when, or I love you if. He's like, I love you now. And this was radically changing everything that the church knew. That they weren't, didn't have to be in line or be at a certain order before they could receive the love. The love came to them where they were in that moment. And this is the tipping point. And this is kind of what I want to start us off with, is this thought. Who the religious were distancing themselves from, here we see Jesus actually devoted himself to them. And as a church, man, this should be our call too. Our desire shouldn't just be to fill up a room with people just like us. Our desire as Christians and as believers should be to see our lives, our friendships, our families, our classmates, our coworkers impacted by the love of Jesus through us outside of here. And this is so religious people, they want a distance. They want to create a place that's holy, that's theirs. This is mine, it's untouchable. You go there, I stay here. But Jesus goes, everyone's welcome at the table. And this is what Jesus does. Jesus receives them, he eats with them. And then he goes on to tell 3 parables in response to this. And so we're going to look at these 3 parables, but here's what I want us to look at, and here's what really hit me the last couple weeks I've been reading this story, is that this story was not just about the lost being found, but it's more about our response to that than anything. He tells 3 stories, and you're going to recognize the stories of 99 sheep and the one lost and the lost coin, and then there's the prodigal son. But it's not just about lost things being found, and that is a big part of the story. But really, if you take the context of how Jesus got into telling these parables, it wasn't just that lost people become found. It wasn't that just some people get saved. It was that how we see them, how we treat them, how we love them, our response to those people. And this is what Jesus is addressing in these stories. And so when we take the context of how we get into this, I think it may shape the way we read these stories a little bit. So the first story he tells us is about the sheep. And Jesus tells this story, 3 stories, and these stories have 3 specific audiences. This is the brilliance of Jesus. He's talking directly to the men in the room at this point. And so he tells a story about the sheep, and here's how it goes. So he told him this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? What man of you? So he's, in essence, what Jesus is saying here is who, or like which one of you, all of you would do this. Like this is something that any of us would do as a businessman, as someone who recognizes the value of a sheep, who recognizes that is one still valuable? Absolutely. Is there one that still has value? Yes, yes, yes. And so he goes on and says this, and when the shepherd has found it, he lays it on his shoulder, rejoicing. So this story is directly, I believe, is directed towards the men in the audience, the businessmen, the providers. And so when he asks this question, what man of you, when you have 99, is the one still valuable? And the answer is yes. There's no margin for waste when you're the one that has accounted for, has purchased, has created, has ordained, has watched, has developed this system. So as a farmer, there's no margin for waste. Every animal has a value attached to it. You don't just go, well, I've got 99, like I've got 4 kids. If I take my kids to Disney, I lose one, I don't go, well, I still got 3, that's pretty good. 75% of my kids, I still have 3 out of 4, ain't bad. You know, like you don't do that, right? Why? Because each one of them has a specific inherent value. And a businessman knows that every single thing has a value attached to it. Every single thing. And so he's talking to the men in there going, hey, do you not see that this one sheep still has value? There is no margin for waste. Every sheep is accounting for. We don't just round up. Every single sheep is purposed and precious. And this is what he says. When the shepherd recognizes the sheep is not there, the shepherd leaves to go find the sheep. And I think this is so key for us this morning to recognize that the lost don't find their way to Jesus, that Jesus finds his way to the lost. And there's not a journey that, and maybe you're here today and you don't really know Jesus or you're just exploring it, you got questions. There's not a journey that you're on getting closer to Jesus. The reason that you're here today is because he's been drawing closer to you. The reason that you're asking those questions today is because he's been poking on your heart. Like Jesus is in pursuit of you. And this is what he shows us in the shepherd. The sheep get lost, they wander. And if you think, well, I'm here today, like, is that not my sign of pursuit? No, you're just wandering. We're just swinging at stuff, and we do that in life. Like, we just try things. I do that all the time. I got a new restaurant, like, I'll go try something, and what do? Well, this is what I do. I ask the waitress what's good, and then I just take her word for it. Like, we just wander and try things, and sometimes accidentally get it right. But this is what the sheep is doing. It's wandering, it's lost, and Jesus pursues the sheep, finds it. He's the good shepherd. And I love this. This is his response. Jesus, when he finds it, when the shepherd finds it, he doesn't chastise it. You would think if a sheep gets lost, I mean, my dog has done some stupid things. It gets out. We got a very small dog, a little multi-poo, and it's like 4 pounds. Like, it's literally this big. And we've got a wood fence, but my neighbor on the right side has an iron rod fence. And my little dog could just, like, walk right through it, so small. My dog gets out all the time. And so when it gets out, when I find it, oftentimes the first words to Murphy are not kind. Because my kids are crying and it's late at night and we don't know how long he's been gone and no one knows who opened the door. And so my words to Murphy are often not kind. It's usually chastising in some way, like, you dumb dog, will you stay in the yard or just get totally lost? One or the other. Quit letting me find you. Let's finish it or let's stay put. One or the other, pick one. And that's what, I think sometimes that's what we think, like, that's the natural response to anyone that's lost something and someone's wandered off on their own. Someone's made their own dumb decisions. Someone's gone and they've done things that they knew weren't right or knew were harmful yet continue to do them. Our response as a father, as a parent, as a friend is oftentimes, you dummy. But what does Jesus do? He doesn't put it on a leash and drag it behind, talking back to it the whole time. He lays it on his shoulder, rejoicing. This is how good Jesus is. That even when we find ourselves lost, even when we've gone and done things that we know aren't right, and we find ourselves on the fray, we find ourselves beaten up, we find ourselves hungry and dirty and broken, and on the outside knowing that we're separated from God and separated from the family of God, God is not walking up with a stick or walking up with a leash ready to drag us back, but yet when he finds us, he picks us up, nurtures us, cares for us, and rejoices in the fact that we're found. You see, like, I always read this story about lost being found, lost being found, lost being found. This is not just, it could have ended right here. And when he has found it, it could have just ended right there. And when he has found it, he went home. But in every one of these stories, you're going to see something here. He lays it on his shoulder, rejoicing, brings it back to the flock. When we're weary from trying on our own, from our own failure and sin, Jesus scoops us up. And this is the picture of the cross. That the weight that we can't carry, the weight of our burden, of our sin, of our mistakes that we can't carry on our own, this is a picture of what Jesus did in the cross, a foreshadowing of what Jesus was about to do for them. He comes in and he picks up the weight. He comes in and picks up what we can't carry. He comes in and he fills the gap between we don't know where we are versus being found in the family of God. We couldn't find our way back. We couldn't carry our own weight. We couldn't make all the wrongs right. Yet he comes in, scoops us up, and he carries us across the gap, across the ravine, and brings us back into the family of God. And this is what Jesus does. This is a foreshadowing of what he was doing on his cross. Bring us back into graces, back to the table of the Lord. When we can't carry it anymore, it's good, it's okay, because we have someone who will scoop us up and carry it for us. Verse 6 goes on to say this. And when he comes home, so when the shepherd comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I found sheep found my sheep that was lost. And then he goes on, verse 7, just so, I tell you, so now he's talking back to the Pharisees, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need to repent, who need no repentance. So he tells them, hey, if just one person gets saved, heaven throws a party. Yeah, you guys are religious. You guys are already saved, and it's okay. But I'm telling you, when just one is found, heaven throws a party. There's a party in heaven, a gathering of people, and this is the response that Jesus says that we should have when the lost are found. So he goes on to tell a story about the coin, and this is specifically about a woman who lost her coin. And so let's read this story. So now he's bringing the women into this discussion. He goes, or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and her neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that was lost. Jesus again, just so, I tell you, there's joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So now we get a picture. First we had a picture of Jesus going out into the fields, out into the chaos, out into the wandering, going way out and finding someone who's lost. Going where maybe someone is alone and separated. He's going out, he makes that journey, and the shepherd finds them and brings them back. But in this story, we get a little bit different picture of Jesus actually going into the dark. See, this woman, she's lost her coin. The coin is separated from the purse. And she has 10, and one somehow is separated from the others. And so it says that she lights a candle and is looking through the house, meaning it's dark out, it's night. And even while everyone else is asleep, and it's a dark, and you feel alone, here's Jesus lighting up the room, sweeping and looking under every rug. Nothing can be hidden from him. He goes into every corner and looks under every chair and looks under every rug, looking for every last one. Why? Because everyone has value. There's an inherent value attached to every single person. And so Jesus goes into the dark, he's sweeping, he's looking, this woman sweeping and looking, and she finds this coin and brings it back to the purse. And what does she do? She calls all her friends. Hey, will you celebrate with me? Will you rejoice with me? She throws a party, and they rejoice. And Jesus goes again, just as I said before, if just one gets saved, all of heaven throws a party. So you get this, now you got this storyline here. Someone was lost, and then it is found, and then there's a response of rejoicing. And so then there's the last story, and this is the really popular story, which is the prodigal. And now Jesus is talking specifically to sons and daughters. So he addresses the men, he addresses the women, and now he's talking to the sons and daughters. Jesus, in his masterful communication, tells 3 quick stories, and now everyone in the audience has a place of connection. Whether you're a businessman, whether you're a woman who's at home, or whether you're a son and daughter and you're wondering, are my parents a bunch of dummies and do I need to do my own thing, which is what every young adult thinks at some point. And then I was telling this to my friend Patricia the other day, I was like, then you turn 30 and you call your parents. And I remember the specific phone call with my dad. I called my dad. It was just a random day. I said, Dad, I want to tell you something. He's like, okay, go ahead, son. I was like, you were right. And he goes, about what? I said, all of it. All of it, Dad. There's an age once you get to the point you look back and you're like, I thought I knew better. I thought I had a different perspective or a different angle, or times are different, Dad. It's not like how it used to be when you were a kid. And then at some point you reach an epiphany. You have a moment. You're like, okay, Dad, you were right. And so now here's Jesus telling the story to his sons, the young adults, the young people in the room. And he says this, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. So he's asking for his inheritance. What is mine, what's rightfully mine, being an heir of you, being a son of you, based off of our culture and our context. You owe me, there's something that you've earned that will pass down to me. And he says, will you give that to me? And it says that he divided his property between them. So at this point, now the father, because he has 2 sons, has to divide the inheritance between the 2 sons. He can't just hand them one without also knowing what the other son is going to get. So he takes both. And it says, not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, and he took the journey to a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. Key thing here. when the son went and asked the father for his inheritance, it was completely backwards in their culture and their time. And see, what you may not know, because we don't necessarily do this with inheritance nowadays, is that it was often the family business, the property, the inheritance was not necessarily coin as much as it was business, people, workers, property, cattle, tents, different things like that. And so when the son comes and asks for his inheritance, it's not like the dad can just write a check. Dad had to go and make major business decisions. Had to get rid of half of his sheep, half of his cattle, half of his workers, half of his tents, half of his property to be able to hand that to his son in a value of finances and money. They didn't just have bank accounts that they passed on money. It was actually property, things like that. And not only that, so just so you know the amount of work it took for the father to do that for his son, but for a son to ask that of a father while the father is still living is to say to the father, I wish you were dead. Because the inheritance was not supposed to be passed down until the father passes away. And then you step into that inheritance. So when the son gets in front of the father and says, I want what I have now, he's basically saying, you're dead to me already. I care more about myself, my plan, my life, my dreams, my desires than I do about this family and I do about you. Will you give me what you owe me? Now keep in mind, if you've got any kids, and I hope to pass some things down to my kids, but the reality is, and I've said this to my kids, you probably said this to your kids if you've got kids in the room, you don't own anything. And so my kids have made a statement like, well, I want to get on my Xbox. It's like, you don't have an Xbox. Why did you turn my internet off for my phone? You don't have internet. You don't have a phone. You know, hey, yes, someone's like, amen to me. You know, like as a parent, there's nothing. So this was a major, you have to understand and grasp the amount of dishonor from the son to the father. And it wouldn't have just been dishonorable one-on-one. Because keep in mind, the father had to go sell things to be able to have cash value. Everyone the father knew about the disgrace. The father's publicly humiliated. He goes and he sells half of his stuff. He goes and he prepares a way, and then he knows his son's walking off. The whole town knows what his son is doing. The whole town now is talking, what kind of dad is he? How did he raise his kids? Imagine the humiliation, the shame, the sin of the son towards the father. Dishonor, disgrace, hatefulness, selfishness. And then this son, this is what he does. He takes all of it and he goes far away. So I got to get away from dad. I can't stand him, got to get away from my family. And he squanders his property in reckless living. He squanders his property in reckless living. He goes on to say this. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine hit the country. And he began to be in need, so now he has nothing left. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. And so he went, I forgot 15. Where's 15 at? Oh, I don't have, oh, there. Yeah, so he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. And when he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. So now this son has hit rock bottom. He squandered everything. In fact, in just a few verses, we'll see that he didn't squander it. He partied. He had debauchery. He had hired prostitutes. This dude went crazy. He went to Vegas and lost big. He did not win anything on the slot machines. And he went and he lost big, and he found himself at a place where he had literally nothing. Now he has no friends because he has no money. All his friends were attached to what he had, and when he didn't have it, he had no friends. He had no place to live because he was temporary. He had no business. He had no system that he had established for himself. He took his dad's money and just went and lived in inns and traveled and did different things. No friends, no place to live, and now no food. And so he finds himself working for someone who owns pigs. He finds himself living now with the pigs. He finds himself now eating what the pigs are eating. Like the amount of disgrace, how far the son falls, it sounds bad, but considering the context of the culture and the audience of who Jesus was talking to, this is actually way worse than bad. This is not just being broke, homeless with no food. It's not just being dirty and working a job that no one wants to work. The squandering is bad, yes. The reckless living is bad, yes. The prostitutes are bad, yes. The parties are bad, yes. Is he backslidden from his father and from his faith? Yes. Is there debauchery? Yes, it's all bad. But he ended up in a pig pen. This is specific, and there's a reason why Jesus uses this as the bottom, as falling as far as you could fall. Because he's talking to a bunch of Jewish religious leaders who in their mind and in their context and in their culture and their religion, pig, pork, bacon, if you will, was considered extremely unclean and unkosher. At no point could they ever eat or touch anything that derived from a pig. Never. I mean, no bacon. I mean, can you imagine that? No bacon? It's a tough life. No pork chops. They were not just told not to eat it. They were also told not to cook with it. They were told not to touch it. That animal was considered ceremonially unclean. So if you were to come in contact with a pig or something that touched a pig or was around a pig, then you had to go through an extensive process to become clean once again. And now here's this Jewish boy, as Jesus is telling this story, who had left his father that now is living with the pigs, sleeping with the pigs, working with the pigs, and eating with the pigs. That's as far down as you can get. Not only did he not have a place to eat or belong to with a family or relationally or financially, this young man now was spiritually at the rock bottom. He was considered unclean spiritually, as far away as he could possibly be. And there's three major themes that you see in all three of these stories. And here's the first one, that everyone in this story at some point became lost from God. The first story, that the sheep becomes lost from the shepherd. That's the first story. The second story, the coin becomes lost from its owner, the woman. All of these are metaphors or parables about being separated from God. And now here's the prodigal son, which represents us as sinners, is now separated from the Father, which represents God. Everyone started off by being lost from God. And then second, they become lost from the family. The sheep, that one sheep becomes lost from the 99. The coin becomes separated from the purse of coins. And now the son is separated from the brother and the father and the family. There's a separation of family, lost from the family. And then the last one is this: you become lost from oneself. The sheep found himself alone, wandering, no hope, no way back. The coin found itself lost in the dark. A coin can't make its way anywhere without someone's help. I don't know about you, I've never seen a coin walk, talk, roll on its own. And so a coin is all on its own, and now here's the son, all on his own. And it's amazing, in a matter of just a few short words, how Jesus paints a very specific picture. That sin, that it separates us from God. It separates us from the family of God. And it even separates us from our own purpose. It even separates us from our own calling, our own potential. That sin keeps us from actually walking in the plan that God has for us. It doesn't just keep us from God. It doesn't just keep us from the family of God. It actually keeps us from our purpose. That when we're walking and living in sin, we're not being all that God has called us to be. That God has a bigger and better plan for us. And as long as we continue to walk in sin, we're not going to walk in our purpose. And so sin causes us to be lost. And this is a parallel that we see in all three stories. And this is where the prodigal son finds himself. He is completely lost. Lost from God, lost from his family, and lost from himself. Completely separated. But verse 17, maybe my favorite verse in this whole story. But when he came to himself, I think there's a moment when we're walking in sin where we come face to face with the reality of our depravity. There's a moment that we look around and we go, this can't be it. In fact, maybe you've said that in the last year or so. There's got to be more. It's a phrase I've said before. God, I hope there's more. There's got to be more than this. This can't be it. This can't be the whole plan. This can't be as good as it gets. Where we're looking around and we're actually measuring and acknowledging the funkiness that we're in. and saying, there's got to be a way out of this. He came to himself. He recognized, he looked around and went, this can't be God's plan for me. This can't be it. I've recognized that I am where my decisions led me to be, but I don't want to believe that this is it. I believe that there may be something else. And he came to himself, and this is what he said. How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough to eat? The people that just work for my dad have more food than, but here I am, I'm perishing with hunger. And he says this, I will arise and go to my father. And I will say to him, I have sinned against heaven and before you. He acknowledged, he had an acknowledgement of his sin, the reality of where he was. And then he had a confession moment. I'm gonna speak my sin. I'm gonna confess my sin to my father. And he says, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna confess my sin and I'm gonna repent. I'm gonna position myself to a place of servitude. He said, if even my father's servants, if that's all I can be when I go back, that's better than where I was. He's recognizing the position at which he comes to God. I am not good enough. I am not holy. I am broken. I am messed up. I am a sinner. And he recognizes this is the position I'm going to go back to my father with. I'm a sinner. I'm going to confess my sin, and I'm recognizing my position is lowly. I'm humbled. And he says, so I'm going to go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against you, against heaven and before you. And he came face to face with this reality. He said, I'm going to say, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And so he arose and he came to his father. So in the first story, we get this picture where the sheep is wandering on his own and Jesus comes to the rescue. Where the coin is lost all on its own and Jesus, or the woman in the picture there, Jesus comes to its rescue. Now here's this young man who's finding himself all alone, yet he has a moment where he recognizes his own sin. And this is where Jesus brings humanity into this story. We're not sheep. We're not coins. We're not objects. We're people. And inside of each of us, there is a desire to know our Creator. Inside of each of us, there's already a seed plant of the calling of God towards Him. And so this is why the son goes, I've recognized where I am. I'm going to start heading back towards the Father. And so he does. He rises and goes back to his father. But this is, I love this. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he felt compassion, and he ran, and he embraced, and he kissed him. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Just like in the first story, just like in the second story, in the third story, we get this same picture. Jesus is looking for the lost. He is ready. His eyes are alert and attentive. He is ready, he is looking, he is eager. The father, while he was still a long way off, the father saw him. What does this tell me? The father every day woke up and walked to the edge of his property and looked and said, is my son coming back today? I've put that seed in him. I've planted that word in him. Is he going to come back today? I'm looking, I'm eager, I'm expectant. He has joy. If you will go back to the very beginning, he is okay with receiving the lost. He's expectant to spend time with the lost. And he's looking, he's out there, and it says his father saw him and he felt compassion, just like the shepherd picks the sheep. He didn't start telling his son all the things he had done wrong. And then his father says he ran and he embraced them. And culturally, this is a big no-no. Jewish men did not run because they wore these long kind of tunic things. And the only way to run would be to pull your tunic up, your little thing up that you wear, the long thing, pull it up so you could actually move your feet to run, which means you'd be showing part of your legs, which was culturally not the right thing to do. And so he does. He pulls it up. He says, I don't care what the culture says. That's my son. I don't care if you think this is embarrassing. I don't care if you think this is shameful. I'm willing to take on the shame of all humanity so I can just have a connection, so I can just embrace, so I can just connect with what was lost. And in fact, when he sees him, what does he do? He runs up, he embraces him, he receives him, and he kisses him. Where did the son come from? Where was he just before this? The pigs. Ceremonially unclean. The father doesn't say, hey, I see you, go take a bath, and we're going to talk about this, and we'll see if there's a spot for you at the table. He pulls up his skirt, if you will. He runs towards the son. He embraces the son, gets all up in the mess, all up in our shame, all up in our disgust, all up in our failures, all up in our sin. He comes all the way to it. He puts it on himself, and he restores them. And this is a picture, it's a foreshadowing what Jesus does for us on the cross. He takes our sin, he takes our shame, he takes our failures, he takes our mistakes upon himself. He was clean up until the moment he embraced us. And this is what Jesus did. He was perfect up until the moment he took the cross. And when he took the cross, he embraced us. That cross was not, his arms were spread, but they weren't spread. It was actually him coming down and giving us a hug, bringing us back into, restoring us and redeeming us into the family of God. And this is what this father does. He puts himself and he takes on the shame. I can see the neighbors going, I cannot believe he's bringing that boy back home. That boy should have to be his slave. He should have to pay back what the father has given him. Now look at him. He let him walk away, and now he's letting him walk over him again. Here he is, but the father goes, I don't care what the rest of the world says. I don't care that this looks foolish. I don't care that no one else has ever done this before. I'm willing to take on your sin and your shame because I want to restore you. And so this is what he says. He embraces him. He kisses him. And the son said to him, he starts to confess, here's my plan. I've gone through it. I practiced it in the pig pit. Now I'm here. Father, I've sinned against heaven, and before you, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And before he can even get to the confession, the father cuts him off. And this is what he says. The father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put on a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And this is what the father does. As we come and we think we've got to make this grand gesture of our confession of our sin, just the heart turn, just the heart turn of repentance. And the beginning of our confession, Jesus goes, that's all I needed. All I needed was to see that you actually longed to be with me. See, at first, all you wanted was what I had to offer. Now you actually want to be with me. You see, at the beginning of the story, Jesus says they were gathering not for his healing. Why were they gathering? To hear him. And Jesus goes, I get excited about that. My soul is lifted about that. When people actually want to be with me, not just want the benefits from me, but they actually want to be with me. And here he is showing this story laid out. Here's a group of people, maybe they don't look like you. Maybe they're a little more messed up than you. They're sinners. And Jesus goes, but these people actually want to be with me. My son actually wants to be with me. And from that moment on, bring the ring and the robe. I'm going to restore him. I'm going to bring back everything he has. And so he goes on to verse 23. Let's have a barbecue. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. We're having beef ribs tonight, baby. For this is my son. Now check the language. It changes here from lost to found. Now check what Jesus says. For this is my son who is dead and now he's alive. It's not just lost being found. There's a principle of dead to alive. Again, he was lost and is found, and they begin to celebrate. You see, it's not just that the lost are found. It's that the dead come alive. And I think when we recognize that, then our response as the church can't be like these religious people and say, well, they're not like us, and they don't have it all put together, and why are you hanging out with people like that? When we see people who are dead come alive, as the church, as believers, our hearts should be full of rejoicing. Our response, because this is a miracle. Like this, lost people, there's people that get lost, and I've lost a kid in Walmart, and I found them. That happens all the time. If you've lost a kid, you found them probably at some point. You know, that happens all the time. But dead things come into life. Dead things come into life. Not just like, well, I was kind of wondering and I kind of found my place in the church. But when people have life transformation, they were full of sin, and then they interact and they meet the real Jesus, and then from that point on, their life is never the same. Church, we got to celebrate when that happens. We got to have a party when that happens. And that's what Jesus is showing us here. When dead things come to life, we have to respond. We can't just sit there with our arms crossed. This story is not just about lost and found. It's not just about dead and alive. It's about our response to it. And so Jesus goes on, and he finishes telling this story. When he finishes telling this story, there's another character in the story. He says the older son, the one who didn't waste the money. He's out in the field too on the same day. He's working though, serving the father. And as he came and drew near to the house, He heard music. He heard the party was happening. And he heard dancing, and he called to one of the servants and asked, what are these things meant? Like, what's going on? Why are we throwing a party in the middle of the day? What's going on? And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But the older brother was angry, and he refused to go in. And his father came out and entreated him. This is how good God is. And this is what Jesus is showing us in the story. You think I'm just here for the sinners and the tax collectors? I ran out to the field to meet that sinner, my son, the prodigal son. But who else did he go out into the field to meet? The religious, prideful son. This is how good Jesus is. He doesn't go, I'm just here for the broken, messed up people. He's like, I'm here to meet with the religious people too. And as a church, that's something that we want to do. That's why our name is Vima. It means to take a step. And we want to see people take a step. We don't care if you just came to know Jesus a week ago. Maybe you're here asking questions and you're starting to take some faith steps in your faith journey, or you've been saved for 30 years. Here's the reality is that each one of us have steps to take. That there's a journey that we're in process with. There's a spiritual journey that we're in process with. And as a church, we're not called to one over the other. We're called to help people take their next steps, whatever those may be. And so here's Jesus. He doesn't just go run to the center. Do we celebrate when sinners come to know Jesus, when people who are lost are found, when the dead come to life? Yes. But there's also a moment when some of us that have been around a long time have something come back alive inside of us. Or maybe it's become dormant or dead, or maybe we lost that joy of knowing the Lord. And here's the good news that Jesus beats both of us in the field. Whether you've known him a long time and you're not really where you hoped you would be and some things have kind of fallen asleep or fallen dormant, or whether you've been far from him, Jesus goes to both. And he entreats him. He goes to his son and he's imploring him, asking his son, would you come back to the house? But his son answered the father, look, these many years I've served you and I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, notice the wording here. It doesn't say when my brother. See, this is where we're, as a church, we got to get this right. When we see people who are broken, who disagree with us politically, religiously, sexually, all the different things that we can disagree with in the world today, when we see people like that come and start to ask questions and experience the real Jesus, we don't need to distance ourselves from them. Why? Because they're brothers and sisters in Christ. Just because we're different doesn't mean we're disconnected. We're all created in his image. And so, but look what the brother does. He distanced. You're a son of yours, not my brother. When he came back, he was devoured the property with prostitutes. You killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. You see why the older brother's really, I think, ticked off in this moment? It's because if the father gave half of the inheritance to the one son, he spent it all. The son comes back, and what does the father do? He restores back to him his inheritance. Bring on a ring and a robe. Where do you think the ring and the robe came from? There's only half the inheritance left. It was the older brothers. So as Jesus is restoring the younger brother, guess who he's taking it from? The older brother. And this is a picture of our place in the church. As Christians, as believers, what we have, we should be willing to part with so that others could come to know him. We don't hold on to what we have. There's a lesson of generosity here, that what we have, either one, God can take it and do what he wants with it, or two, we can give it generously and say, my brother who was lost is now found. Whatever I have, whatever I can do, whatever I can invest, whatever I can say, whatever time I can give, whatever money I can give, whatever I can do, I want to see those who are lost come to know Jesus. And this is the heart, it's the posture of the religious. This is what we should do. But here's the older brother going, you took it from me. All I've ever done was obey, and then you just took it from me. And so Jesus invites him, and in the story, the father says, what's mine is yours. And it was fitting to celebrate, and he was glad. For this your brother was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found. You see, a story is not just about the lost being found, but the found finding joy in others. It's not just about the lost being found. And I've preached this message and this story a lot about the lost being found in the heart of the Father, the heart of Jesus to pursue the lost. And that is a very viable part of the story. But there's a part that I uncovered as I was reading this week and studying this week, was that the story is not just about lost and found, but also the response to the found. And I think as the church, the message for us today, most of us in the room know Jesus. Most of us in the room have had a relationship with Jesus. So the message for us today to pull from this is not just lost being found, but do we find joy when lost are found? Are we excited when we see people come into a church that we've never seen before? Well, are we excited when we see people come to church like, man, I know a little bit about them. Like, they need Jesus. Or are we judging them? Are we arms crossed? Are we looking at them crossways? Or do we see them as someone that Christ is going to restore, redeem? Do we take what we have and we hold it, my spot, my seat, my money, my time, my energy? Or do we give of it freely so that others could come to know him? Do we find joy in seeing others find Jesus? As sinners, they would be someone that we would say, man, they're far from God. I don't even know if they're really even very religious. And I believe Easter is a weekend where people give religion a chance. It's a weekend where people say, I'm not sure about Jesus, but I'll go with a friend. And I know many of you on this time, you guys invite friends and families. And this is what I want to make a commitment to you. I'm going to preach the gospel, and I want to see lost people found. And when I do, Easter is a celebration. On Good Friday, we're going to have a moment of reflection, and it's going to be a service of reflection, of heaviness, of responding to the cross. But on Easter is going to be a party, I'm telling you right now. And we're going to have fun. We're going to celebrate because it's the day that we celebrate where dead things come to life, starting with our Savior, all the way following with us that are in the room. And so on Easter Sunday, man, bring a friend, bring someone with you, because I believe it's a day that a lot of lost people can be found. Let me pray with you. God, we love you. We thank you. God, today I pray, God, that you would soften our hearts. God, to those who are maybe not like us, who maybe are different than us, God, who maybe are lost. God, those who are maybe separated from you, lost from God, lost from the family of God, lost maybe even from themselves. God, soften our hearts towards him. God, may we find joy. God, may we find joy in the testimony and telling them about what you've done for us. God, may we find joy when we see them walk into this church. God, may we find joy when we see them take a step in their faith journey towards you. God, let this be a church that celebrates with joy, that rejoices when even just one comes to know you. God, I pray that our hearts would be softened. God, that our spiritual ears would be open and our spiritual antennas would be up, God, as we kind of progress towards Easter. God, that as we go to work and go to school and go home and we're around our neighbors and friends, different people, God, that you would maybe help us to see those who are lost.